We have 2 microphones right here in the middle for whoever wants to ask questions. Please do. Just walk to the microphone and ask your question. Say your name and keep it short.
Hi there. My name's Chad Walsh. As an American, I'd like to say hi to Lord Lisa. I actually have a question in regards to slightly a different perspective on sustainability. It seems like you guys covered all of the normal bases, and it seems like there's some really good work going on. My definition of sustainability is also involving the fact that the city needs to sustain itself economically, and there needs to be a lot of smart people doing really smart things in the private sector and education, all that kind of stuff. For the first time in human history, most people in the world live in cities, and the connectivity from social media, all that kind of stuff, seems to be bringing everyone together in new and interesting ways. Most people in the room have a computer in their pocket that's more powerful than a computer from 6 or 7 years ago. And so I'm curious if there's any initiatives that you guys know of taking the huge amounts of data that are available publicly and freely, social media and whatnot, and integrating that into connecting the city and really integrating, the community into communicating with the industries and trying to make sure that the sustainability is like a kind of crowdsourced, so to speak. Because it seems to me like a lot of the stuff...
I love everything you say, and any of you who have followed what I've been trying to do in the last year, I'm a big advocate of having more free Wi-Fi in the city, and we're starting from a very small base. I am fortunate enough to travel in this role, and I have to tell you, when I'm away, I never pay for Wi-Fi in a hotel, and yet they have the audacity to charge our interstate and international visitors $20-30 a day in a hotel room. I tell all the GMs here, you've got to get rid of that cost, build it into the room rate. It just shouldn't happen, because the connectivity with Wi-Fi of being able to promote tourism, shopping, restaurants and all of the other services just makes smart economic development sense for a city. So I'm a huge fan. I again don't know enough of the detail, but I know it is a smart way for a city to operate, and we really need to get right in on this. I'm very much into social media myself, Facebook and Twitter, and I see the benefits from first-hand experience of showing people what my role involves. And I know that as we interact and connect with each other, we're all learning more, we're all starting to click onto new ideas that can drive so many wonderful things for the city. I know it's a simplistic answer because I'm not the technical expert in it, but I get what you're saying. But we need to start talking this issue up to really force many other players in the game, stakeholders, who can make a difference, to come on board with that kind of thinking. So, all power to you for bringing it up. Brad, do you want to add to it?
Well, I agree that, in fact, it is interesting, as you say, when you go overseas, in that sense of, in fact, the connectedness that you do get, and it transforms public places, and that's why I gave the example of King Square, where free Wi-Fi all of a sudden transformed that dead public space actually into one that people used. Part of your question, I think, is an interesting one, because at a mayoral level, it actually thinks a state government policy question as well around actually creating that creative capital, those kind of places that attract creatives and actually where people want to stay. And it's that fundamental question, that WA question about life beyond the boom. Actually, how do we start to really capture that? All I know is that we've really got to start thinking about that, and we've really thought about that. And how do we start to attract back into our centre those creatives that we want to see? And I know that Lisa's got similar thinking on that, because that is what's going to be the future of Perth, because the mining thing's not going to last forever.
Yeah, and I'd just add, because we don't get to read a lot of the great stuff that's actually going on in this city, for whatever reason, we won't go into that tonight, the fact is there is so much fantastic stuff going on. This morning I opened an international conference for the World Muscle Society. There are 500 doctors in Perth at the PCEC for neuromuscular disease research. And just in Perth in the last 6 months, doctors here have discovered new genes in fetuses. Have you read about this in the newspaper? Wouldn't you like to read about this in the newspaper? It's pretty cool stuff. There is a lot of creative industry stuff happening here, and there is a lot for us to be proud of. The general public don't get to read enough of it. That's why I love an opportunity now to share with you how fantastic, the diversification is. It is alive and well, but we do need to keep talking it up. And so, of course, the fashion festival. You know, you see the Lord Mayor frocked up and sipping champagne at yet another fashion festival event. But I actually am championing something very worthy. Years ago, those young fashion designers would have had a hope in hell of getting a decent job here. Now, because of technology and internet capabilities, they can actually be an international designer from the comfort of home. You look at people like Aurelio Costarella, and then you look at some of the new ones like One Fell Swoop, Butcher and the Crow, Stephanie Ordino et al., who are coming online. This is fantastic, but we need to be much more positive as a society and really look at the glass half full and really talk up all of these things and not knock.
Thanks so much for taking the time to speak to us tonight.
Pleasure.
I really appreciate it.
More questions?
Good evening, my name is Raoul Ebertet. Brett, thank you very much for your generous support of the Fremantle Community Wind Farm. I've got no question about the project. I recently read that, the question is, when you as a council are a carbon neutral council, I'm just wondering if you actually buy something like green power. And the second question too is, we've been recently advised by our utility, publicly owned utility Synergy, that they cannot distinguish between green power and black power. So if any council claims to be carbon neutral, is it now black power or green power? So that's the question. How do you feel about this this issue that Synergy has raised?
Yeah, I understand the question, and they seem to distinguish quite well when they send us the bill. So I'm not sure why they can't distinguish the other way around. Now, I mean, if in fact we were originally buying green power as part of the council's carbon neutral program, we recently decided as a council to actually buy certified offsets, which were cheaper, and actually use the remainder of the money to invest in renewable energy ourselves, because we actually saw that as a more, in fact, because the payback, the price of PV, just to give you one example, has come down so dramatically over the last few years that the payback for councils, as long as you're using the power yourself in your building, is actually really worth doing. So we've actually started going down that route. I'm kind of glad that we did that before the issue that you raised occurred, because I think, it was pretty bad form, I have to say, is that they can't be charging customers green power rates and then saying they can't distinguish. WA actually has the lowest use of green power or power from renewable energy in the whole of Australia, and there's no good reason for that. In fact, we have most amazing climates in terms of wind and in terms of sun for producing renewable energy in this country, and one, we should be producing it, and there is some good things happening. In fact, the big solar farm just opened up north only in the last couple of days, but there's a lot more that we could be doing, which I'd like to see in that space.
I'll just add a few points. With the slides, I was just conscious of the time. I could have elaborated on the LED lighting that we did at Council House. It's actually saved money on what the traditional lighting was on the exterior of the building with the floodlights that we had. It's LED lighting. It's also enhanced what was a very dark spot within the city from a tourism or a night-time activity opportunity, and yet the actual cost of running it has reduced. It's only a couple of $1,000s a year to run that beautiful coloured lighting, and yet look at the impact that it's had in terms of, bringing a lot of happiness to many people. I get a lot of letters still about the lights there. Also, it's fair to say that, I don't know if you know, I'm hoping I'm telling you stuff you already know. The City of Perth is championing an affordable housing development in Godrich Street, not far from here actually. We're building some key city worker units on a car park site that the city owned without losing the car park. We're actually decking the back of that. So the car parking is still there, but from the streetscape perspective, we are providing 48 inner city key city worker units, and people will have to qualify for tenancy of these, and they'll have 3-year tenancy, but during the time that they are tenants, they will be making a minimum of a 20% saving on rents compared to the market rent at the time, and hopefully that is an incentive for them to save, so that after their tenancy expires, they then have a good savings to enable them to find alternative inner city or near city living and really get a taste for, you know, less commuting and more inner city living. And let's not forget the cat buses too. I mean, you know, a lot of these things we sort of take for granted now. The whole idea with the cat buses was to really mitigate short trips around the city, which it does beautifully. And, you know, they're bursting at the seams now in terms of, you know, being so well patronised that we really want to see more and more. In case you don't know, the cat bus is funded by the Perth Central Parking Policy. Anyone who owns city property and has more than 5 car bays in that city property pays a levy, and it's collected to fund the cat bus and potentially other central city transportation needs. And even the City of Perth pays that levy on every on-street and off-street car park that we have. And we introduced recently paid parking in the streets of East Perth, West Perth, which are residential areas. There was a little bit of angst from people, but if you are living in the city, you should be able to you know, limit the number of cars you need, and many of those units do have 1 or 2 car bays in them, and yet we still had people griping and whinging because they were literally families with 4 and 5 cars in the one household living here in East Perth. And I had a few of them who are actually my neighbours because I live there myself. I'm like, you know, it's really nice that you've got your kids living at home and they're still at university, and yes, they've got a car, but you really need to think that if they are living on a cat bus route and close to central transportation, that they should be really walking the talk and obviously abandoning a car or 2 and sharing a car or 2 and downsizing. And we all need to really think of the little ways in which we can individually start walking the talk and, you know, doing more.
Hi, my name's Ali Bengill, and my question is related to Brad's, you mentioned the scheme amendment recently, that's recently gone through, and how the WAPC wouldn't approve the minimum 4-star green star rating, and I'm just wondering why they refused that and how you think that could be overcome in the future.
So it's a good question, and it's a kind of a complex one. They refused it because they didn't think that the scheme should be used to mandate such things. We put 4-star in even though we wanted 5 because we just wanted to test the policy, the idea. What we've done, we've put it into policy, so now it is a policy that any building above 3 stories in Fremantle has to be minimum 4-star green star. Which is okay, but the problem with policy is that it can be appealed. You can take a policy to the State Administrative Tribunal and say, I don't want to comply with that, and here's my reason. By putting it into your scheme, it's locked in and it's mandatory and everyone knows. And our view is, well, give us an example of when a more sustainable building is not a good idea. And I couldn't think of one. So on that basis, our view was it should stay in the scheme. But we have, look, unfortunately, I'm a bit frustrated about the lack of coherency and leadership. It's not just at a state level, it's at a national level around green buildings. Green buildings are the lowest hanging fruit in terms of actually reducing our carbon emissions. And unfortunately, we're just not seeing that kind of leadership that makes sure that the next generation of buildings is actually going to reduce both the carbon and water footprints.
Yeah, what I would add is, I mean, Brad's just talking about new developments having that rating. Then we've got to actually start seriously talking about a retrofit of all the existing building stock that exists, which, you know, some of the conditions there, you know, with small amendments, you could have huge gains in terms of, you know, the savings that would be made. But we're not even, or we are discussing it at the City of Perth, and we're really looking very closely at that. But again, even on a national level, it's still not a high enough priority.
Thanks Brad and Lisa. I'm Pete Best from over the river in South Perth. We've got a beautiful view of the City of Perth, and we're just a short bicycle ride from Trio. Love your work. I really would like to hear some tips about how you carry the people of Perth and Fremantle along with you. I love the work you're doing. How do you get the energy of the population along with you?
Well, some days you do and some days you don't. But you just honestly, this is my pet subject at the moment. I can really tell you, I went to something that changed my life in August this year. It was actually in UCLA, and it was a leadership course for young people, and I had the great honour to actually take 21 young Western Australians who were scholarshiped by my friend Dr. Dorfman to do this leadership course. I got as much out of it as those 21-year-old kids did. And it was really taking a more positive attitude. And you might, if you're on my Facebook or you've read the paper today, start to see, we've got to be kinder. We've got to be more positive as a society. We've got to uphold and champion positive a hell of a lot more than we do. We're 22 million people, and for whatever reason, talk poppy, negativity, costs of living, I don't know what it is, we tend to be a little bit harsh on ourselves and a little bit down. We have so much to be grateful for. We have such a great nation. We are a science-leading nation. We are a top 20 world economy. We just need to start talking more positively and not be caught up with the crap that really is blinding us right now. And so I tell you, I am not going to be the Lord Mayor of Perth forever. I have to make the most of the term that I am lucky enough to have, and I don't let the turkeys get me down. I am out there every day doing the best I can while I've got the honour of this role, and I mean that 100%. There is so much right about Perth. We know we are the world's best kept secret, but sadly a lot of the kids here don't know how bloody lucky they are. You know, I have the good fortune to go to China and other countries where I see kids really fighting to get into our universities and fighting to get a chance to get a great education. And a lot of the time our kids get that great education and take it for granted. We just need to be so positive and really be championing people who are trying to make a difference. And everyone in this room, by even being here tonight, is trying to make a difference. So all power to each and every one of you. But let's uphold each other. Brad and I aren't perfect. You know, we both make mistakes. We don't have the answers to everything. But if we talk through social media, if we uphold, if we share, we can all leverage and make, you know, better solutions than we can individually come up with. Because one of my favourite sayings is, individually we are but one drop, but together we can be an ocean.
Hard to follow on from that, so I won't.
Hi, good evening. Thanks for a lot of interesting thoughts here. I have two issues, and one is probably a state or national issue, really, more than what a municipality can do, and that is water. I'm amazed. I come from Western Cape, South Africa, Cape Town, where we have similar issues around water as you have in Western Australia. And I'm really amazed that so little seems to be done around the water issues, and so little awareness is around it, and that we allow ourselves to get into a quite desperate situation before we start waking up to the reality of that. That's the one issue. The second one is around transport, public transport, transit in the city. I've never come across anywhere in the world where a motorbike has to pay for parking. And I'm amazed to see, and that is the reason for parking bays in the central city of Perth, standing vacant in the middle of the day, which could be used. It seems a remarkable way to discourage people getting out of their cars and getting onto motorbikes.
Okay. First of all, on the water issue, and I'll be really quick because I know there's other questions up the back there. Last week I was invited to give a case study on Perth at a real estate conference in Dubai, and I took up the opportunity, all expenses paid by the way, not at the cost of the City of Perth, very sustainable for us, and it was really interesting because during that conversation there was a session on water, and a lot of the countries that were there, Jordan and you know, the different Middle Eastern representatives, were really stressing about water, and they were talking about the inevitability of war over water, which we read about here. And I couldn't believe what I was hearing, because I thought, you guys think nothing about building a 6-star hotel, over-engineering. They engineer before they architecturally draw anything there. It was like completely weird to me, and I thought, yeah, they're saying they're going to have a war over water. I just couldn't believe it. If anyone could build desal plants and not worry about the cost and do all that they needed to do, they could. And yet they're not doing that. They're too busy doing their fancy architecture and all of this completely manufactured stuff. Bring it back to Perth and Australia. I mean, we're very fortunate to have 2 desal plants, and obviously the aquifers and, you know, need to rethink about, you know, water use and water conservation as we do. I'm very focused on water conservation. Within the City of Perth, we are very conscious about the water usage we make. We were nationally awarded for the works we did at Point Fraser, where we completely reconfigured the stormwater drainage and all of the works there. And even within the city, we continue to focus on that, and, you know, we use artesian bores to water the gardens, and we're very, very careful about the water usage we maintain there. To jump to your next question, which was the motorcycle parking, we actually give free motorcycle parking down at Mounts Bay Road. It's not fully taken up. And as to usage within the city, I just hark back to the fact that we are an 8.2 square kilometre local government authority. Space is at a premium. And you know what? If we gave free parking to motorcyclists, I don't think you'd see a huge number of people jump to motorcycles, because a lot of people, I personally wouldn't want to be on a motorbike next to a big green bus myself, or a silver bus, whatever colour they are these days. The reality is that is not going to be the change or cause the change that we need. Also, I think with parking, we're very conscious of the fact that the City of Perth earns more than it actually earns rates in parking revenue. We can sort of feel guilty about it, but at the same time we turn a lot of that back into general revenue, and it produces a lot of the great events and marketing and stuff that we're doing in the city, you know, the affordable housing projects, etc. What we need to do is look at future revenue streams that will offset our reliance on the parking revenue, and we are doing that. But at the same time, while Perth is so car reliant, we can't, as a local government authority of 8.2 square kilometres, be held personally responsible for the fact that the greater city is so car reliant. What I do think we need to do is actually focus on, and it's a paradigm shift to what we're thinking, we need to actually focus on encouraging people to commute to park at a certain point outside of the city, and no one will want it in their backyard. It'll be the NIMBY issue. At some point they need to, get out of their car and then commute on cat buses or light rail or whatever it is into the central city. And obviously we need to lessen car usage into the inner city as much as we can into the future, because what I can tell you now with the traffic master planning that I'm privy to is, with the narrow streets that we've got and the competitiveness between buses, inevitably light rail, the vehicles we have, the delivery trucks and the pedestrians, it ain't all going to fit in another 50 years, let alone 100 years.
Quickly, we're just going to...
I think that kind of covered it for both of us.
We'll take the 3 next questions quickly.
I'm very supportive of the green initiatives, and I'm sure everyone else in the room is as well. How do you plan on kind of educating the rest of the public about the importance of sustainability and change? Because a lot of what I see is that people are not very supportive of it. They kind of have this idea they're entitled to a big house, they're entitled to drive their car. And you mentioned that even with such high parking rates, people still are willing to pay that premium to drive. And so even in the younger generation, Facebook is just bombarded with absolutely horrible things about the change in our cities. And there's very nice things as well, but I just wonder how you're going to educate those people about the need to change, because there just seems to be big resistance, and I don't think people fully understand how important it is.
I think it's a really good question. I feel a bit lucky in Fremantle, because in many ways in Freo we do have a constituency who's very supportive. In fact, just to give you an example, the plastic bag, that local law that we currently have out for advertising, was driven by our community. The council went, great, that's what the community wants, we'll support it and get behind you, and that's why it's happening. So in many ways I feel a little bit lucky in that regard, but I think you're right in terms of Greater Perth. There's no doubt is quite a lot of resistance, and people love their cars and they love their big houses and they love their suburbs. And I think that's going to be one of the great challenges, is how do we make that transition? Part of it's going to be through pricing. That's why things like the carbon price are important. Probably not big enough to make major changes, but will be important. But ultimately, you've got to actually also show that a sustainable lifestyle is actually not giving up things. It's actually about a better lifestyle as well, and actually how catching the train to work actually means, I've got the train here tonight because I get to work the whole way. It's a bit boring, but actually get another hour of my life to actually catch up on emails. And that's actually really important. I don't want to drive because I can't email while I'm driving. Those kind of things, about those win-wins around actually sustainability, actually not having an acre of lawn out the front of your house, but actually having a native garden not only reduces your water use, it actually brings birds to your garden, and it's easy to look after. Those kind of wins, I think, and having a solar passive house is just cheaper to run. For me, sustainability is about win-wins, and I think that's what we need to communicate. It's not about giving up things, and I think that's the transition we're about to make.
I mean, I could add a lot, but all I'd say is there's a lot of false economy with people. Some people think buying a cheaper house out in the suburbs is smart, but in fact then they're spending a whole lot more on petrol and poor use of their time commuting, whereas they might have found something in the city or inner city area that was maybe a bit smaller, but it had no garden, they had free time on the weekends, and they weren't commuting as far. This is a personal discussion that everyone has to have with themselves, but we do need to continually have these discussions at large, and everyone needs to start doing a little bit. And of course, as you say, there is this huge sense of entitlement in Australia, and it's not just in the sustainability environmental stakes, it's in the what we earn stakes, it's in what we think we're entitled to stakes on so many different levels. And it's really sad because, again, when you're out in the real big world out there, you again then look at Australia from a different perspective and you realise that we need to really readdress how we think.
Thank you.
Lord Brad, Lord Lisa, thank you very much for your time this evening. My name's Sid too. I'm an architect working in the city of Perth, but I'm not one of those fancy architects. A very pragmatic question for you, Lisa. I'm just wondering when the city of Perth will introduce a recycling service for commercial tenancies.
I agree.
At the moment, the city of Vincent have to.
Well, it's a very difficult issue for us, and the fact is, it's something we have spoken about. Please know that. We do a great recycling for all of the inner city residents, and at the moment, the commercial recycling is done by the buildings by private subcontracted operations. So it's not like it's not happening. But can you imagine if the City of Perth did it, having to get access, provide all the bins or whatever it is within a very tight space anyway? It's a logistical issue for us, and while there are commercial operators who can do it more astutely and smartly, it is actually the way to go. Don't think it's not happening in the city, it's just in this instance the City of Perth isn't driving that element of that commercial recycling.
I would say that there's 6 people in our office.
I can't hear you.
We would say that there's only 6 people in our office. We can't justify the cost of getting a commercial
No, but you
recycling.
could pull together with your neighbours and try and do something yourselves like that. It's just because the City of Perth doesn't do it doesn't mean you should give up on the idea.
No,
And this is
there
the
are
thing.
several other
It's
local
a
government
two-way
authorities
street.
that do offer a commercial recycling service, such as the City of Fremantle.
Yeah, but they are a much bigger area and they have different issues in terms of their street widths and the amount of traffic and residential populations and other things that, Brad's already shared with you. I'm not saying we can't look at it again and we won't look at it again, but the fact is, in the meantime, while it's not a service, work smarter, not harder, and collaborate with some of your neighbours and be the change you want to be. Don't always just flick it back onto government to, if you're not doing it, we don't need to do it either, because that's, again, the sort of sense of entitlement thing that the lady was also raising a moment ago.
Well, I can speak for Sid because I also work for him. We actually take our recycling from the office back to the City of Vincent.
Fantastic.
To recycle for us. Actually, quite often.
Well, there you go. See, you are really taking
Quite often we do
seriously.
it on a push bike too, which. I was trying to keep this one quickly, but Brad, you mentioned that you're pushing the operational energy efficiency of your buildings, trying to get them to 4-star in commercial space, which I think is fantastic. And Lisa, you had that pie chart, carbon footprint of buildings around 23%. What that doesn't show is the embodied impacts of our buildings. And there's a huge amount of energy and carbon that goes into actually building stuff. If you consider that embodied energy, you push 23 up to 35%, sometimes 45% of our carbon footprint in buildings. So my question is, just quickly, we're pushing the operational energy up, which is fantastic, but if you knock down an existing building and rebuild to get extra energy efficiency out of it, you can actually have a perverse outcome for the environment. So my question is, are you going to start quantifying that embodied impact of your buildings and getting people to protect their heritage and renovate, or at least quantify before you knock down what's the benefit of going to 4-star versus renovating what you've got?
Yep, really good question. And there's a great saying, the greenest building is one that already exists in some ways, and it's true. In fact, as you're saying, you can have 20 to 30 years of operational energy embodied in the energy of what that building's made up of. We're trying to get ahead. In Freo it's a bit easier because the reality is, except for we got some pretty ugly 1-story 70s things that we're happy to see a bulldozer through. The question is, in those cases, should we try to capture those? Probably not. But I'll give you one example which we have taken that seriously is the Myer building, which Myer's leaving Fremantle, and a new store will go in there early next year. Before that happens, that building is going to be totally retrofitted. Now, there was talk about knocking it down, but it was pretty clear that the embodied energy in that, and the fact that it was structurally sound, meant that it was actually better not to. Probably not quantified in the way that you're talking in that kind of mathematical sense, but there's certainly a philosophical approach is where you can retrofit, we do. We're having this debate over another building in the heart of Fremantle, the Queensgate Cinema building, where we take those cinemas and try and, the cinema operator doesn't want them anymore, so how do you then retrofit a cinema? And those kind of challenges, they're really tough ones, and I think the point you're raising is absolutely key, and I guess the question maybe back at you is, do you know the tools that exist to do it, and do they exist?
I'm glad you asked that question, because yes, they exist here in the city of Perth on Pierce Street. It's a web-based bit of software, so what you were talking about before about internet and Wi-Fi and connection, that's exactly what we do. And we make it really, really easy to answer those questions, so you're not thumb-sucking, is it better to knock it down and start again? We can help.
I would just add too, the City of Perth has been championing upper floor activation, and as you would appreciate, you look in the malls, you look in many, actually I was in one today, I don't know if you know where Wolf Lane is, and basically Rob Pierucci used to have a dress shop on Murray Street. It's now the Margaret River Chocolate Factory shop, and Patrick Howard, the owner of that building, took me right through, and Peter Bell, the footballer, has the I forget the name of it, you guys probably know better than the name, the little bar at the back. I got the full tour of that building today. I mean, the whole top floor's empty, beautiful area for potentially, you know, commercial offices, and then the whole basement area is empty, and they're looking at doing something pretty amazing down there. Just cast your mind back 5-10 years ago, there just wasn't the demand for city space. So yes, I totally agree with your line of questioning, but you've also got to relate it to demand and peaks and troughs of, you know, what the driving forces are, and also from a development perspective. I mean, you know, the cost of land per square metre in the city is a completely different thing to what it might be in Fremantle, and any developer is going to do their sums and know whether it is going to be viable for them to retrofit or more potentially beneficial for them to bulldoze and build. They're not that stupid, because they're not going to throw money down the drain, and also the banks aren't going to lend the money in this climate to do that anyway. So, you know, I understand where you're coming from an environmental perspective, but you've also got to look at an economic perspective and a city demand perspective, because we've come a long way from being a branch office economy in the late 90s to being, you know, a global city now in the 21st century.
Last question, we have to go drink.
Hi, I'm Ross. My interest is in public transport, and it's very fragmented. I mean, we're in a very large distribution. I mean, it's not like when I was living in London where you had so many people per 100 square metres. But what I don't see in around the world as well is it's not bike friendly. Now, I can ride my bike and I can leave my bike at the train station, but I then can't ride my bike on the other end. And I'd like to see a carriage where you can literally just roll, you know, design 4 bikes. And then, because some people work in the cities and we're, you know, 1.5k away, that's a little bit too much to walk, especially in summer, and vice versa, you know, that 1.5k.
Yeah. Spot on. So, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. In fact, again, sorry to Europe stories, but just being in Europe and seeing all across Northern Europe, that exact thing. So the last carriage, huge bike logo kind of sprayed across it. You know, that's the carriage you can get on, and that's when you can actually, people know that, and to expect it's designed differently, and it's designed for that. And I think a proper integrated public transport system is also one that actually integrates bikes, both on buses and on light rail and on trains. And we see it all over the world. Perth hasn't quite caught up to that yet, but that's one of the things. In fact, it's not our issue, to be honest with you, not to palm it off, but this group needs to put pressure on the state government to actually integrate that to happen.
What I would add is, I mean, we're an ageing population, and I'm sorry, you're not going to see me on a bike riding 20 k's any day in the future. I might when I retire, let me finish, I might when I retire, because I live over here in Henry Lawson Walk, consider going to maybe Bennett Street on a bike, but I'm not going to compete with the buses and all of that. I hope that we will be able to separate the traffic, but let's be realistic, with the forecast population growth and the seeming inability at the moment to separate traffic, light rail, buses and cars and all of that. It's nice, but it's not Copenhagen, okay? So let's not try and aspire to be something that we can't be, but we can improve what we've got. We can get more cycling happening, and we will. And the City of Perth's bicycle plan, if you haven't read it, and please do before you comment, does actually create strong east-west routes, north-south routes, with an intention when the waterfront, the link and Riverside are finished to create the bike hire services that we aspire to have, to encourage people to be able to take bikes from precinct to precinct. But at the moment, we simply do not have the space to have those bike hire facilities. The space does not exist. But hopefully in 5 to 8 years' time, those bike hire facilities will be in existence, and then they'll be complemented by ever-increasing cycle lanes, responsible cycle lanes that then separate the traffic. I'm all for that, but again, at the same time, you've got to balance it with the needs of all other demographics.
I'm sorry, just one last lucky question.
If you're really quick, because our caterers are waiting for us.
Thanks. First of all, my name's Joanne Hervik. I'm really encouraged by what you're both been talking about. Can you hear me?
Just.
Yeah. Okay.
That's better.
I was particularly interested in what you said about Jordan, your experience in Jordan, Lisa, and that you were amazed at the response about water and forecasting that there might be war over water, and talking about the disconnect. They're building these huge hotels and so on. I find that there's the same disconnect here in Australia. Water is Australia's most precious resource, and the answer is not more desalination plants. Desalination plants have their issues, and just on a pure cost-benefit analysis, they are most definitely not the answer, including damage to the environment. So my question, I guess, is what is being done to promote recycled water and conservation?
Okay, again, this is a state government issue. We are mere mayors of local government authorities, and again, I reiterate, I'm not an expert in the water area, but what I would say is we do need to encourage everybody to be talking about this issue and speaking about it a whole lot more. But at the same time, food security and all of these things, selling off, our farms to whatever country might want to buy our farms. When we're looking at a forecast population growth of 62 million by 2100, and we're already now producing food for about, I think it's like 45 million people. We've got a population of, 24 million people. We're currently in a very nice position. But when our population is 62 million, if we're still only producing food for 45 million, we're going to be relying on importing the food. They're also the kinds of conversations we need to be having as a country, and not allowing our farms to be sold off to the highest bidder at the time because the poor old farmer guy can't, make it work anymore. The government needs to come in and subsidise and help so that we can maintain food security for the future. So I throw all these things back at you again because I'm not an expert in this area, so it's unfair to ask me a lot of these questions. But I agree with you, it's fantastic to be putting these things out there for us to even be pondering them. The very fact we're even discussing these issues shows that we care. But there's 200 people in this room right now? What about the other, people out there that are probably, not worrying about it?
My two-word answer is probably $1.10 per 1,000 litres is a little bit cheap. So, and I think that's ultimately got to be part of the solution, is actually saying that we don't value our water, and it shows because it's way too cheap. And in fact, when you get your bill, most of your bills, you're paying for water, you're just paying for the right to access it. So I think that's a conversation that we need to have. Pretty hard in this political cost of living kind of environment, but I think it's what we need to have.
Thank you. Thanks to the mayor for coming tonight. Thanks to Central for such a great venue to have our mayors. And thanks to you. Just wanted to remind you guys that Perth Green Drinks is a volunteer organization. It's made by us. That means you too. So if you have suggestions, questions, or anything that you want to tell us, Susan and myself are just doing this right now. Wilma, who started Green Drinks, is here tonight. So just drop us a line. We're happy to chat and incorporate any suggestions that you may have. And please like us on Facebook. There's drinks and nibbles out there. Thanks for coming tonight.